Yes.
Yeah, welcome everyone to the first of two Let's Talk Food discussions taking place at the Food Festival today. If you haven't already done so, pop your phones on silent, that would be useful. And before I launch into the session, I'm delighted to welcome our four guest speakers here. And first of all, there's Ellen from Winnow Farm Seeds. She's got a wealth of knowledge about the importance of local seed production, how it can adapt to open pollinated varieties. What? Was that for me? Or? Oh right, okay. Yeah. I've lost the flow. How you can adapt to open pollinated varieties, local climate over time, connecting to food production. Now, as an allotment grower, I'm really aware of the difference that different varieties can make. Having moved down here, things that were growing successfully where I used to live are not anything like as successful, so I had to learn about new seeds at that level. So I'm really interested to hear what Ellen's got to say on that. George here, as well, he's farmed in the Marshwood Vale all his life. The farm is heavy clay soil and the land is often steep. Historically, he was dairy farming, but 4 years ago the cows were sold and he, along with Amanda and his two daughters, started making the transition to regenerative farming with cropping and grass growing. Now I'm looking forward to hearing about some of the decisions George has made over the years as to take him to the point where he is today. Leila from Tamarisk Farm. I believe it was Leila's grandfather who was ahead of his time when he adopted organic regenerative methods to produce food on the land at Tamarisk Farm. Now I would describe Tamarisk as a mixed farm that also is also home to the most amazing range of wildlife and flowers, thanks to the methods initiated by Leila's grandfather all those years ago. Go on a wildflower walk with Leila's mum Ellen and you'll only have walked about 50 yards in an hour. The pasture is so rich and diverse. I highly recommend, if you see them advertised, going on one of those. Tomorrow morning. So it's not a fast walk, but it's an absolutely fascinating walk. And finally, Chloe. Chloe works as a grower on the market garden at Tamarisk Farm and has also established a new training course in Agro Ecological Farming, which will be taking place for the second time this summer. Now I'm really looking forward to learning something about the experiences and ideas that have shaped the design of that course and the importance of agroecological training for the building of food security. So, our panel. Now you can applaud. Now, like George, I grew up on a farm in the 1950s. It was the end of the era of the horse, which had been essentially the way we'd been farming for thousands of years, and the beginning of a period of rapid industrialisation, mechanisation, to increase food productivity. The use of agrochemicals was a huge benefit, but today we're grappling with the environmental impact of those changes. So food security, and one of the things that's the focus of this is the Bridport Town Council Food Security Plan, which has been put together in collaboration with others, is in an increasingly chaotic political world, when combined with energy security and climate change, mean we are ever more impacted upon by events well away from Dorset. Trying to mitigate the impact of global events on our local food security is in some ways what this session is about. So, can I invite Ellen, first of all, to share her ideas and things with us.
So I'll start just by telling you a bit about the business. So Winnow Farm Seeds is the seed company. We grow open pollinated vegetable, herb and cut flower seeds. We specialise in vegetables and herbs which are chosen for their flavour. So I'm really interested in growing tasty stuff. I think, I don't know, are there a lot of growers in the, home growers, allotment growers in the room? I imagine there might be. But you know, maybe you're growing a tomato, you sow the seeds in February, you diligently look after them. You get to maybe the beginning of July, take your first tomato and think, this is going to be delicious. You taste it, meh, you know. I don't want that to happen. so yeah, I'm offering these varieties chosen for flavour. We also have this range of cut flower seeds. We share our field that we rent in Broad Oak, so just up the road, with another business called Meadow Sweet Flowers and Floristry, who are amazing flower growers, florists who do wedding design and this kind of thing. So the cut flowers we offer are, their favourites, beautiful flowers, but also have all of that really key like stuff for cut flower and floristry work, which is like thick stems, long stems, good vase life, all of that kind of thing. And all of the varieties in our catalogue, we're really keen for there to be a kind of emphasis on robustness, resilience. So varieties that I'm not interested at all in varieties that you have to mollycoddle to kind of get them to do things. I want seeds that you put in the ground, they go. You harvest, you're happy, stomach's full. So those are the kind of varieties that I'm really interested in. Partly, this is kind of like an environmental thing that is really important for home growers and, all farmers growers to be using less inputs, just on an environmental level. But also because for example, when a plant gets attacked by an insect, or you forget to water the plant and it goes a bit droopy, in response to that stress, those plants will produce protective compounds. It primes them to deal with this kind of stress. Those compounds we experience as flavour. We also, our bodies experience them as antioxidants, like all of that kind of those health benefits. So having varieties that are really robust and can cope with all of these kind of elements of stress is great. Having like veg that is better for you in so many different ways, better for your soul in terms of it being really tasty, and better for your health.
You're doing okay.
Now, open pollinated seeds are what we focus on as opposed to F1 hybrid seed. So open pollinated seed, basically it means you can save the seed from them freely, and the next season you will plant those seeds and your seedlings will look very similar to the plants that you saved them from. That's not the same with F1 hybrid seeds. But the reason I'll talk really loudly as we have the megaphone in the background, but the open pollinated seeds have a much wider sort of broader genetics compared to F1 hybrids. So for me, I think that provides them with the kind of genetic toolkit to cope with all of the weird weather, the stresses that these plants are like. That now increasingly, like we're in June, it's very windy, it's very wet, we're all enjoying this lovely weather. It gives the plants the toolkit to kind of cope with that sort of stress. Those are the varieties I'm really interested in. I mean, I'll just add a little point to the discussion, which I suppose when I looked at the kind of the discussion question, I think what's often left out of conversations about food security is this thing that food it's so personal, it's a culture, it's about community, it's not just about production and numbers, and that for me is that community aspect is really, really important. As a farm, we farm in a way that's very, very safe, very comfortable. We invite volunteers up to the farm. We've got we work with the council on bringing diverse groups up to enjoy the farm together, and we farm in that way, so that in a kind of gentle way, essentially, so that we can invite the community to be part of it. And I will, going on, we'll be doing sort of seed to table events where we'll try the different varieties and things like that, and I'm really hoping that it will be a business that kind of invites Bridport into it as well. We are in our first year, so right now the crops are planted, we will be harvesting in the autumn, and they will be for sale in winter, so something to look forward to, as well as this discussion.
Brilliant, thank you. you're in the process of transforming the way you farm the land that you farmed for decades. Can you tell us a little bit about that process and the impact you feel it may have on local food security?
I think it's worth just looking at a little bit of the background of why the agriculture industry is where it is now. And for me, it all started in the 47 Agriculture Act, which probably very few in the room will remember, including me. The nation collectively said it didn't want to be held to ransom ever again for food. And the 47 Act then encouraged farmers to feed the nation. And that went through until 1983. And farmers did that. That's what it was about. I don't know how many of you can remember food from our own resources, but in about 83 we were probably 80% self-sufficient in temperate food in this country. We are now under 60%. From 83 until 2022, farming was supported by the CAP, and I'll just leave that there. Whatever you do with it. But since then, support and encouragement has been public money for public good, and the public good has been seen as environmental gain. However, the Ukraine war and the cost of living crisis that followed has reawakened the need and the understanding of food security. So allied to that has been the growing awareness of climate change and global warming. And if farmers weren't aware of it before this last winter, they are now. And to give you some idea, at Coppet Hill, our annual rolling rainfall is normally 32 inches, and the last 12 months up to the beginning of June, we're at 53. Yeah. And the result of our 34 hectares of winter wheat, only 4 hectares will be harvested. The rest is write-off. We're by no means alone, but the effect will be a lack of wheat for either bread making or animal feed this winter. It will mean that straw for dairy farmers is much more expensive. And the outcome for farmers is a catastrophic collapse of cash flow in the autumn. And not knowing at the moment, but when it comes to the autumn, when they're buying their seed for next year, that's when it's going to be painful. So what are farmers doing in this area to address all these issues? We're working together to share ideas, experience and knowledge. And the Marshwood Vale, with help from Nick over there, that tall guy with a funny hat, we've established a cluster of 14 farms with a strategy to demonstrate how working collaboratively can benefit both the farm businesses and the environment. Our objectives of the cluster are to improve the natural environment and landscape rather than the individual farmer, and to achieve greater improvements than individual holdings could achieve on their own. In particular, we aim to improve and work on soil management through regenerative farming, biodiversity including priority habitats such as lowland meadows, boundary management, hedges in most people's language, rivers and stream management, and woodland restoration. The cluster's work is based around practical delivery of good farming conservation practice by helping farmers fully understand work done by researchers looking at reducing greenhouse gases and improving soil structure. Sharing techniques and machinery ideas learned both from home and abroad. And the innovation that's available is phenomenal. And the new environmental schemes that the previous government has come out with is how to implement the measures on the farms. So we've been doing this by a series of learning events that build knowledge to comprehensively understand the ongoing agricultural transition and the latest innovation techniques. So examples are, we meet and look deeply into herbal leys. Now there are farmers in the Vale who 10 years ago, if you said herbal leys, they'd give you a very weird look. But as one particular farmer I think at the moment, who's really embraced it, because these leys have grasses, they have clovers, they have different herbs, plantains, all sorts. And he's seeing his cattle healthier and his sheep healthier, and he's seeing the grass and the crop grow better for very little fertiliser, if any. We appreciate the importance of dung beetles. You can get really passionate about dung beetles. It's a whole new world. And the importance of dung beetles and how to reverse their decline. And also the effect on soil compaction. Now, one of the things that we have done wrong over the years on our farm is we grow lots of maize. Now, maize is a great cow food, but you tend to harvest it in the autumn when it's very wet. And you tend to harvest it with very big machinery. And it was all right 25 years ago when tractors were 70 horsepower and they didn't have the weights. They now, a tractor weighs 20 tons, a trailer weighs 10 tons, and when you fill it with silage, it's another 20 tons. It's compacting the soil, and that's a massive issue, and one that the cluster is working on to share that knowledge and to see what can we do about it. And that is really where your regenerative farming comes in. And so the definition of regenerative farming, because you'll hear it spoken time and time again, is the process of restoring degraded soils using practices such as no-till planting or limited use of pesticides and fertilizers based on ecological principles. Regenerative agriculture strives to work with nature rather than against it. At university, I was an economist, and the one topic I studiously avoided was soil science. Jean Ingram, my lecturer, would have rolling over in her grave now. I should have done soil science. Life's full of those mistakes. So, as an example, Coppet Hill has cooperated with our neighbour, James Bowditch, to share in the purchase of a direct drill. This little direct drill is pretty innovative. It's £90,000 worth of equipment. But we feel it really necessary to have this sort of investment to try and get the soils right. It eliminates the need to plough. It basically cuts the slot, puts the seed in, fills it open, comes over again. But you do have to have the soil in good condition, and perhaps part of our trouble last winter was the soil is not yet in the condition it needs to be. Direct drilling will allow the soil to become more fertile, more biologically active, less susceptible to erosion, and a higher resistance to compaction gives it more structure. In practical terms, you go out with a spade and you look for worms. Oh, you like worms. And they use less fuel. You improve the soil biome. It's another thing that most farmers in the Vale turn over and think, what the hell are you talking about? It's basically, it's millions of microorganisms which contribute to the ecosystem by nutrient recycling and protecting soil structure. And you damage that biome when you plough. Now, there are always going to be times when you need to plough, but you need to get out of the habit of it and try and reduce that. And again, no-till or minimum till will allow for greater carbon storage and lower the greenhouse gases. But it's not all about the environment. Farmers need to make a profit. Farmers need to understand food security and the need to feed the nation, and know that they farm not as an either or, but believe that there's a balance to be struck between feeding the nation, caring for the environment, and reducing greenhouse gases. If we take Coppet Hill for an example, half our land is suitable to produce crops in arable rotation, or would be in a normal year, and the rest of the land is better suited to growing low input grass, either beef or sheep from our neighbours, or in our case we've got 8 Exmoor ponies, which are the sweetest of the devils that keep getting out. But they are totally wild. They've never been handled, they've never been ridden, and they are lovely. And they are there. And I was looking at it yesterday, I think they're beginning to chew the tops of my thistles. I got a real thistle problem. So what about the next generation? In the past, farming's had a poor press. We were seen as the employment of last resort, where you could go if you could do nothing else, and where you worked long hours and poor conditions, often in the cold and rain, for very little money. But we are changing. We understand the needs of a work-life balance. With help from technology and innovation, the working conditions are revolutionised. I sit on a tractor now and you have to wear shorts in midwinter. They are brilliant, but it makes people want to drive them, want to do it. Our work requires highly skilled and well-educated entrants. I cannot drive some of the tractors that come on our farm. They've got computers on the side of them and it's just gobbledygook. You need highly trained people to do this. So, what are we doing? Well, the Melpash Agricultural Society, which is another organisation I seem to be involved with, has established Discover Farming. And the purpose of Discover Farming is to inspire young people to consider a career in the countryside. There are 3 focal points for our work. We've got a classroom at Washington Farm where we take whole classes. We fund whole classes, 30 children at a time, to Washington to learn. Simon takes them around the farm, they look at how crops are grown, they look at how crops are harvested and then how they're marketed. In addition, we've got a large area of interactive displays at the annual show, which I hope, if you haven't seen or even helped in, Carol, you do. I'm always looking for volunteers. And last Sunday we were, the cluster and Discover Farming together, ran an open farm at Beminster where we had 1,148 visitors. Knackered on Monday. So that's the first bit. The second bit is we go to careers days and school assemblies in secondary schools. Much harder work getting to secondary schools, it's taking us longer, but we're getting there now. And young people are beginning to understand, yeah, there's opportunities. And the third area we're working with is the colleges to stimulate apprenticeship schemes and further education. We need the children to be educated. It's no good just going sitting on a tractor and milking a cow. You need to know the background to it and be able to use the technologies available. So in conclusion, in my career I've been fortunate to work through a period of huge agricultural revolution. When I started, fertiliser was in 100-weight bags. There was no computers the size, twice the size of this room, were less powerful than my phone. We've been through an amazing journey, but it hasn't finished. And to me, the exciting thing is it's changing even faster. As an industry, we're adapting and adopting new practices. We understand the need to protect the planet and its environment, and we understand the need to feed the nation at a price the nation can afford.
Thank you. Over to Leila, Tamarisk Farm, pioneering organic farm, worked in harmony with nature for decades. Yeah. I won't ask the question yet, but I'll hand it over to you.
So yeah, Tamarisk Farm started off when my grandparents, my grandfather had been teaching at a school in Nigeria, and they'd been growing their own food in their back garden, and they came back to this country. This was in 1960, and they looked around and said, but we don't know where our food's coming from. And even then, which is relatively, I guess, slightly early in the story of sort of pesticides and herbicides and all that sort of stuff being used, they weren't comfortable buying food that they didn't understand where it comes from. So they started farming using organic principles, and when certification started in the early 70s, they thought, yes, we should do this. So we've been certified organic since the very, very beginning, and that has definitely impacted how we think about the world. Someone once asked me, is it hard to farm organically? And I'm going, I have no idea what difference it is, because that's all I've ever known. And I think, yes, it is hard, but I think farming in general is hard, no matter how you're choosing to do it. So the reasons that we choose to be organic, so we aren't using pesticides and herbicides, is that has profound ongoing impact onto things like the dung beetles that George was mentioning earlier. They are very sensitive to these things, and they're so important in taking all of the manure, be it from our livestock on the ground or wild animals. They are the creatures that turn that manure from what it is just sitting there into something that plants can actually use. And so if you're using too many pesticides and herbicides, that will damage them, and without those you lose soil quality very quickly. Interestingly, as part of what the Collective Society is doing, I went to a talk run by Breedy Vets a few months ago, which was a drug rep for wormer, what we use in our sheep. And the drug rep was saying, don't worm your sheep. Which I think is astounding, to have someone who is trying to sell you this product being like, no, we want you to use less of it. And that's because that is one that really directly impacts the ground very, very strongly. So we're a mixed farm. We've got sheep, cattle, we've got arable, we have a market garden. yeah, a little bit of everything, which gives us as a farm, you know, security, because if one thing doesn't do well in one year, we've got a good chance the other thing will do fairly well. Back when BSC was an issue, my parents found that the beef price absolutely went down, but we had sheep and that went up, so that helped us, you know, stay on something of an even keel. Sorry, this is where I lose track of what I'm trying to say a little bit. It's been a busy week. The other thing that we are Pasture for Life certified, which means that all of our livestock are only fed grass or silage, whatever it is, but they are not fed any concentrates at all. This means that we aren't ploughing up the ground specifically then to feed ruminants. Cattle ruminants are actually very good at producing protein from what they eat, so they're a really good way of converting food that we can't eat, you know, grass, sedges, hedgerows, we can't go and nibble on a tree, my cows love it, but they turn that into a protein source that is really much easier for us to consume. If you're going to be ploughing up the ground, which is intensive in many ways, the ploughing itself is damaging. Even as an organic farm, we're aware of that. You know, that should be to feed humans directly with things like grain, plants, anything that we need to eat ourselves, rather than putting that through a secondary source that then has to refine it for us when they can refine things that we can't eat. Sorry, I was trying to yeah, so that's what we currently do. It's interesting to think people talk about things like herbal lay cover crops. It's really good to see that going out into the wider world. When my mum first heard herbal lay, what's that? And she looked through the list of what people called a herbal lay. She was like, well, I put that and that and that in anyway. So it's it's really interesting to see these things coming wider into wider knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm losing track of myself a little bit. Yeah, we are also, as a small family farm, it's hard to have enough strings to bow to keep everything going and to try and maintain the soil and everything without overdoing yourselves. But we're also looking into planting some trees, that's walnuts and cob nuts, to see if we can get a good stand of those growing to produce that protein source as well. And that has the other impact of it would give us a nice space to have maybe increase the size of our laying flocks so we can produce more eggs, because you can't, when you've got trees that are young, you can't put the cattle and the sheep in there, they'll destroy them, but you can put chickens in there. So it's all sorts of different things that we're trying to do to produce good local food to the local area.
Thank you. And finally, Chloe, I've got to get my head around this.
It's a bit of a mouthful, yeah.
Teach me.
So yeah, I work with Leila at Tamarisk Farm. I work in the market garden, so growing vegetables and salads. But last year I also set up and ran for the first time a new training course in agroecology. It's called the Agro Ecological Way. So we're an organic farm, but we would also define ourselves as agroecological, and that means basically that we are harnessing different ecological functions in order to enhance the productivity and the resilience of our farming. So the course involves everyone at Tamarisk Farm. There are 6 or 7 of us, and there are sessions that explore all of those different things that we do, so the arable, livestock, pasture-laying hens, cut flowers, market gardening, fibre production, and then we have also a number of different local guest teachers, including Ellen. So Ellen will be delivering a session about seed saving, and then we have Hannah Dyke from Pineapple Estate, who will give a session on soil biology, and then Rebecca Lawton as well from the Land Workers Alliance, and so she will also talk about the other really important aspect of agroecology, which is the kind of political side of it. So it's a movement to try and create food systems which are not only ecologically sustainable but also more socially just as well. And I had the idea to put this course together because there's nothing similar really on offer at the moment across the country, and because we're a mixed farm, which is fairly unusual these days, I'd say, given that through industrialisation specialisation. A lot of farms have become very specialised, but because we do so many different things on the farm, it puts us in a good position to give a really broad overview of all of the different possibilities within agroecological farming. And I think that's particularly valuable for new entrants to the sector, so people who are possibly considering a career in agriculture but maybe don't yet know which parts they're most interested in. So that's really who the course is aimed at. And I think for us the main drive to offer this course and what we hope to achieve through it is just to really inspire more people to choose farming as a career for themselves. And that is an important part of trying to support a wider transition towards more agroecological food systems, because we're going to need a lot more people to enter into the sector if we are to transition away from fossil fuel intensive industrial systems towards more human powered agroecological systems. But really for us it comes from a place of just loving the work that we do and caring deeply about it and being really passionate about growing food in a way that really does centre ecological health. And yeah, I think for us farming can be a really incredible career path, because it offers the opportunity to restore ecosystem health and develop a real sense of ecological awareness and work outdoors with nature, to do something that's genuinely good for society and for the environment, and to keep people healthy by growing nutritious food. And so I think in the context of the climate and biodiversity crises that we're facing, farming can be a really positive choice for people that can actually be a great source of meaning and purpose with the work that they do. So yeah, I think for me that's a big drive for offering the course. And a bit, as George touched on, I do think that agriculture has long suffered from a bit of an image problem, is maybe recovering from that bit by bit, but I think there's a very entrenched idea in this country about what farming looks like, and even perhaps who gets to do the farming. So I think a lot of people, if they try to visualise what would it be like to be a farmer, they tend to picture perhaps someone who looks like George. Possibly sat on a tractor, maybe spraying their fields using harmful chemicals, and farming doesn't have to look like that. And I don't mean to say that.
Do you want to spade up and then Rover stop digging a hole?
I really don't mean to say that the work that George and people who look like George isn't really valuable, but the point I'm trying to make is that because that is such an entrenched idea about what farming looks like in this country, it puts a lot of people off choosing it as a career. Most people don't even consider it. Sorry.
So it's getting deeper.
It's not to say that vision shouldn't include people. It's a reality. You know, in this country, the majority of farmers are white and male. It's the least racially diverse occupation in the UK, and the average age of a farmer is 58. So there's actually a demographic crisis in the agricultural sector, partly because if the average age of a farmer is 58, we just don't have enough people going into
It's
it.
been 58 for 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
I
isn't it?
thought it was higher than that before.
Yeah,
Age of a farmer used to be like 65 or something. So that's nice.
It's dropped a bit.
It has dropped a bit.
So, anyway, not having wanted to offend George too much, but yeah, I mean, part of trying to offer the course is to do what the work you're doing actually with the Melflesh Agricultural Society is doing, is to just encourage more people in, to get a greater number but also a greater diversity of people into growing food, because it is really vital work and can be really meaningful work as well. So we're on the same side.
Well said.
Thank you, Chloe. It's interesting you mentioned the demographic and the age, and here we are sitting, three young women and two more mature people. So a local food security system, that's what we're really thinking about. It's essentially all about inputs, processes and outputs, as any system is. It can be broken down to that. For example, at the outset, the decisions about crops the types of seed to sow, followed by decisions about harvesting, processing and selling the fruits of your labour, and finally the outputs presented to the consumer. To say that it's an incredibly complex system when you look at it from seed going into the ground to the produce arriving either in the market or in the supermarket or wherever it is sold. A phenomenally complex system. And in terms of local food security, that system is also linked with the rest of the country and internationally, because some things we just can't grow here. But in terms of a local food security system panel, what do you think is the weakest link in that system, and how could we fix it?
Land, I would thought. Land being accessible to people to grow things.
I wonder if, particularly small farmers, whether access to a local wholesale market where restaurants, cafes and shops can come and buy their stuff rather than bigger wholesale markets, so that you've got a more reliable way of, because as George said, you've got to make a profit. It's not all about putting food in the ground and growing it. At some point you've got to sell it, and it's got to be a viable business. And is that part of the weakest link in the system for particularly smaller farmers locally?
It's definitely one of the harder bits. As a farmer, you don't also expect to have to be, a marketer and a secretary and everything else, but you have to do as much of that as you can. And if you're not selling into the mainstream system, you've got to find time to talk to the people who might buy it from you, and that is definitely difficult. But both to put the time aside and the energy, and then to know who to find, and again affordability. Are you going to approach someone and say, "Oh, I want to sell you this. Do you want it? This is the price point." Like, I can buy it from the national wholesaler for half the price. Why would I get it from you? So yeah, that's definitely that link between producer and wholesaler is one thing. It's hard to establish.
George, you've been over the years dealt with the large supermarkets, etc., through Den Haag, etc., and you're now transitioning, and so the produce that you're selling will be a different way of going, that you're having to negotiate as well, is it?
No, I mean, what we will sell in terms of food will be tons of wheat.
Right.
And that wheat will go into the national wheat system. We won't be, I'll sell it through wheat grain traders.
Okay.
So it's a different world. I think come back to your question, I think the biggest issue above all is a disconnect of expectations between people who live in an area and what is realistically possible to be produced within that area.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you're quite right. The problems of marketing hasn't mattered. Well, the first half of my career was spent farming, and then I sort of got involved in marketing, and the last half of my career was spent marketing, talking to supermarket buyers, and it's a tough game. But you are dealing in big volumes. One of the examples I give you of the benefits of that system is that when we first went into bacon, Amanda was going around delivering it all around the area. She used much more diesel than our pallet load of bacon that would go to a regional distribution centre, filled up a lorry, and the lorry then went out to all these other shops. So the supermarket or the big system isn't necessarily evil. You need to understand it. But in terms of food miles, it was less food miles going that way than actually endless white vans driving around with not completely full. So to me, the challenge is for people to understand the issues and not make unrealistic expectations of what can be achieved locally.
I suppose going back to that point about land, I suppose an interesting point in terms of like people coming into farming who aren't from farming backgrounds. There is an issue around land accessibility, and I'm like at the stage where I'm setting up a business, and have had this whole thing of like trying to find land, and we've ended up doing it in quite an interesting way, I think, because I've teamed up with this other business together to rent this field together. So we're putting in like a lot of our resources are shared, so they're shared costs. So it's a really kind of, I think it's an interesting model, and we'll see how it kind of develops. Yeah. Oh, and also we managed to get like funding from the council and some private funding as well, to kind of get things off of the ground a bit. But I think definitely in terms of accessibility, that is to get the land in the first place, because it's one thing if your family has a farm and that's kind of, yeah, you're continuing that, but it's quite different if you're coming from a more urban background.
Right, I'm going to throw it open now to questions from you. So, anybody got a yes?
Yeah, I was just wondering what your thoughts were about, in terms of the local level, the importance of food markets to get your produce directly to the consumer, or is that sort of more small scale than you are currently?
So we actually have a market stall at Bridport Market on the first Saturday of the month, on the idea of trying to reduce sort of how much travelling people have to. We've got a small shop in West Bexington. It's not exactly on the way to anywhere, so people have to come out to the shop, especially, which a little bit drives you crazy. It's a good thing for us to have, but it annoys me in the same way that you were talking about, you know, one van running around the valleys. It's so much petrol just to get to the shop. So the idea was that I would be in Bridport Market on a regular day. People could order what they wanted, and they wouldn't have to come out if they were Bridport based. In reality, that hasn't quite worked out how I want. I talked to a lot of people. There are some people who come and get a small bit, but that hasn't. I don't know if I'm in the wrong place, if I should be looking for a different market to be part of. I don't know if actually people don't want what I'm trying to sell. Maybe that's what it is, but I've completely wrong tree. But there hasn't been as much uptake on that idea of, you know, plan your month out, buy your meat from us, and you don't need to drive out to pick it up from us, as I hope there would be.
Can I put another view of, I think farmers markets are great things, but for our previous business it was not right, because if we supply a whole lot of shops in Bridport, butchers and so on, and then you go and do a farmers market and you do a cheap offer or whatever, you're undermining your retailers that are there for 29 days of the month. So I would rather, from my point of view, go to a farmers market and give my product away to promote the brand rather than to sell. Whereas if you're somebody who's much smaller, then a farmers market is, but what are they going to do for the other 29 days of the month?
Not everyone has the freezer space to keep hold of what they need at
So
that time.
they're a
So it's
complicated.
a showcase for your product.
They were brilliant showcase.
Right.
Used them a lot.
Can I
Yes.
just come in on this idea? I've often thought about, there's lots of, so you're small producers, I think it's fair to say, but you've got quite an acreage. You do it as your job. There's lots of people who grow food on their allotments, in their back gardens, and I often wonder if there could be a way of incentivising gardeners to grow more veg. And we have the Bridport Glut, which I think we'll talk about in the session afterwards. So we've got the glut, so people can take excess to give away, which is very noble and lovely. But I wonder if there was some way of getting some sort of like gardeners cooperative or some sort of local thing, so you had a regular presence at Bridport Market. And anybody who grew too much in their garden, we've all had it where we plant our things, we've got 20 lettuces, and we can't possibly eat 20 lettuces. But if you could cut them and sell them for a reasonable price to the people in Bridport, it would be an incentive, you know. So I wonder if something linking, I mean, it would be even smaller scale than what you're doing, but there's lots of land, there's lots of gardens, lots of people growing veg. I don't know.
The issue with that currently is the law as it stands on allotments. As an allotment holder, you're not allowed to sell your
So
product.
there's lots of gardeners.
You can
there.
give it away.
Yeah, there's lots of
And
gardeners.
hence the
as
glut
well.
was established, so you can give your produce
maybe we
or your
should-
surplus.
Maybe we should look
But
at the
maybe
law
we
on
need to
that.
be thinking of, and this would be at national level, enabling allotment holders to sell their produce as part of it.
Because that's a crazy law, right?
But well, that we need to think back. We need to think back to the purpose of allotments, rather like George was talking about 1947, where we've come from. An allotment, traditional 10-pole allotment, was sufficient land to feed a family, etc., with all of the potatoes that they would have grown, etc., all of that. Allotments are very different in the way in which people use them now. You know?
Yes, they are.
So perhaps the law needs to catch up
So
with
maybe
it.
I should have said allotments, maybe I should have said gardeners.
Yeah.
You know.
I thought my understanding was that it was to run a farmers market, was, and we're trying to do something locally in Bradstone.
Yeah.
We're just trying to get the focus right and kind of. But my understanding from the allotments from the old market was we could sell the stuff as long as it wasn't for profit. So if you think how much money someone spends on their allotment,
We never make a profit.
you never make profit. So if it's just some way of pulling back
Yeah.
some of the outgoings.
So we had this market, the WI market in on Saturday mornings, where
Right.
people would bake and
Yeah.
cakes and stuff as well, but people would bring their excess garden produce and sell it. So we had that set up. That went, unfortunately, because of COVID, it's closed down, and also the age of the participants in it. But we're trying to incentivise local food production. Might need to be all hands on deck kind of thing.
Next question.
We were wondering whether there was an educational process or stage that's missing between the consumer and the producer, and whether there could be better connections made in the area, basically through community groups or volunteers. But we realise that there's not the profit within farming, to put in another stage. But we were quite interested in we've got some ideas in Bradstock, and we're quite interested in furthering those. Why we've come today is it's better to have some more connections, network connections and things like that, and really it's knowing the right people to speak to as well. Would it be useful for there to be some sort of forum or something like that we can go through? How do we find out who we can go through as well? Because we'd like to involve the whole of the local community, the schools and people like that as well. And it's all about better land use and better food security, people understanding what it means to buy from the land near them, the biodynamic farming, as opposed to something that's covered in pesticides, for example.
Well, this is the first of that, like as a forum in terms of addressing food security locally. Bridport Food Matters, Marshwood, Vale, Cooperative. Is it? No, it's not cooperative. Is it Cluster? Marshwood Vale Cluster. Bridport Town Council, and I'll talk about our food security plan, which is one of the reasons that we're here. So all of those things are contributing, I hope, to what is now a much stronger local movement in terms of increasing food production and supply of food locally in order to enable food security. George used the word, we're on a journey, and we most definitely are. And as I said, it's an incredibly complex system, and fitting all of those bits together in that jigsaw is very difficult. The Marshwood Vale cluster, for example, is that cluster a similar cluster to the smaller group farmers? Would there be something along those lines where you have a much bigger high street profile because you're working together rather than trying to do it individually? All of these sorts of things we've got to tease out and work through. I saw a hand there.
Yes, I suppose I just wanted to add, you mentioned Bridport Food Matters, so we're a community hub that's trying to increase access to nutritious food in the Bridport area. So we're one initiative, and we're focused more on community, but we've been a virtual hub for quite some time, organising these events and several events over the last 4 years. Now we've got the framework of the food security plan which can help, and so it's partly also about linking things together and literally having a map. Who is doing what, and it's really exciting to hear about what you're proposing about the bread shop, and I hadn't heard about that. It'd be fantastic for us to talk. We put out a newsletter every couple of months, and we try to put in a news about not just what we ourselves are doing, but about what other people are doing. So we're not very regular about it, but contact us and we can share and spread that news. But definitely one of the things that we're trying to do as well is to create a physical hub. Or more than one physical hub, perhaps in the town, where one of the things we will be trying to do is to increase that interface directly between the producer, the food producer, and the consumer. So you're raising awareness, you're creating social opportunities, creating spaces for education, awareness, community building. So that's
It might be worth following up with you separately this, but I was just going to say, a lot of farms do Open Farm Sunday, and I was going to backtrack a second. I've always thought you have to, it's hard to teach adults things that they aren't necessarily thinking about or interested in. So having George and Lee Discover Farming start with the children and sort of making sure that at that very low level, that very young level, people are they're beginning to understand what goes into food and the world they live in is really good. And as those children grow up, they'll take that awareness into adulthood. However, if there is, and I hope there is, a market of interest in adults to discover and learn more about it, then it's really good to, things like the course that Chloe's running, that's probably a bit too intense, it's 5 full days for everybody. But the sort of things that you're teaching, we've done various sessions on the farm to try and sort of help people understand what happens on a farm. And it might be worth discussing more with Bridport Food Matters, running more, not courses, but sort of open days focusing on different things, and maybe if we talk to you about it, not just us as a farm, but other farms as well, would be really interested to open their doors to people who are curious and want to learn more about it. So I think that's something we should follow up later.
Something that surprised me when I moved here, I retired from a very large comprehensive school in Milton Keynes, about 3,000 students. So it's very urban. But one of the courses we ran was a BTEC horticulture. I came here, 12-foot school, a huge rural hinterland. What are they running? Sweet and the other letters, that follow. I was shocked by that. It's happening.
Well, I've got 2 points, but just following on from what this lady said, I thought it would be really interesting if Leila and Chloe could talk a bit about seasonality on Tamarisk Farm, because I think that's a really big part of the whole changing culture. And I mean, I also worked at Tamarisk Farm for a number of years, and it was real education, particularly how strict Leila's parents, Ellen and Adam, are about not eating out of season produce. I mean, they won't eat a tomato until tomatoes come into season. And also they had apples literally all year round, from having Beauty of Bath, which ripe in July, and then they'd have Discovery, and then all through the main apple season, but then they'd also have ones that would keep. And so you'd be finishing up the last of the keepers in June or July, just as the Beauty of Bath starts around. And I think changing culture so that people don't have this expectation of being able to have apples from anywhere, any time of year. And I mean, we do need to be then thinking about growing apples or pears or plums to extend the growing season. So, I mean, there might be other examples. But the other thing I wanted to make on the what's the weakest link part of it is, I think that I mean, land, but also housing is a real problem for rural workers, because the problem is, I think whether you're an organic farmer or a conventional farmer, it's really difficult to earn enough money to pay for rents or to buy a house or to pay for a mortgage. And if we want to attract people into farming, we need to be making it easier for them to live somewhere, because it's totally impractical to live in a townhouse where you've got to get a deposit back and you're not allowed to get mud anywhere. And so we need to be creating places ideally close to where people actually live, so that they can afford to live and work on their land.
Can I just take some issues you probably expect me to?
Yeah. Okay.
The larger farms are now paying wages which are highly comparable. So a dairyman will get 40,000 plus
Yes.
a house.
Yeah.
Now that's not a bad wage, is it?
No, that's.
And okay, they're probably working 60 hours a week. So what? What's 60 hours a week? So I think that's the point that agriculture has moved forward in the bigger farms. Is they know they've got to pay the wages that are comparable with any other industry, and we are now doing it.
Yes, no, and it's good that.
To counter that point, I work on a market garden growing vegetables. I earn minimum wage. I've lived in essentially illegal housing because it's all I could afford, and it enables me to live on the land that I'm working so hard on. So in yurts and shepherd's huts, I've already been twice evicted by the council because it's just not something that's considered acceptable to a lot of people. But there's no way that I can do my job without having access to affordable housing, and it's the same for so many other people who work on market gardens. So
it's very good to hear the two sides of it, because you're absolutely right. That is absolutely the problem. You want good food, you want healthy food, you want food that's not grown with any pesticides, but the result of that is it's going to be probably small scale, and you're not going to pay enough for it to really pay a sufficient wage, a fair wage. Why should you work for that amount of money?
because I love my job. That's the thing.
We should all love our jobs. Yeah, we should. But the consumer should jolly well pay sufficient for you to.
Yeah, well, it's about a deep cultural shift, isn't it? It's about society like valuing the work that actually really benefits society and like provides good for people and for nature, and not.
So on behalf of everybody else, thanks for keeping us healthy.
Right, thank you everyone. We were due to finish 2 or 3 minutes ago. It's a fascinating subject, to say the least, and I think the debate is a live one, as this group here can testify to. As Bridport Town Council, working with other people, we have produced a food security plan. Now, we are not, by any stretch of the imagination, going to be able to deliver everything that in here without support and collaboration and working with others over a long period of time to achieve what's in here. But what I would really like you all to do is to take away a copy or log on to the website, feedback your comments. All of your comments will be valuable in helping to shape the food security plan, and where we as a council and what little money we have can support things to help develop this, we will do that, and we'll be looking to all of you to help us out along the way and support you where we can. Thank you all, thank you to the speakers. And you're now ambassadors. Off you go.
Thank you very much. Can I just do one final thing? Which is to say that we learned last week that Bridport has become a sustainable food place. It's part of the network. And indeed, Dorset is also part of the sustainable food network. I probably shouldn't announce it, because it's all embargoed for another week. I'm talking to the press. But I thought you should know, and you know, this is another thing that we can celebrate by having our fantastic producers, community groups, retailers, and the rest of it.